Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is an amazing crowd that we have here today. In the middle of a winter day when there is no school, Senator, you have more students than any class I've ever seen here at Harvard. I'm Dan Glickman. I'm director of the Institute of Politics, and I'm privileged to welcome the senior senator from the state of Massachusetts here. I must tell you that in one of my last congressional races, not the last one, but the one before that, my opponent ran this ad on TV, Senator, and he says, "Did you know that your congressman voted with Bill Clinton as much as Ted Kennedy did?" And I thought, well, I'm in tall company there, you know. I can't think of enough to say about this man. Archimedes, the Greek mathematician, wrote, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." For 40 years, this man, Ted Kennedy, the place for him to stand was in the United States Senate, and there he not only moved the Senate, but he moved the country, and he has moved the world. For 40 years, through his entire Senate career, he has consistently fought for civil rights at home, international humanitarian relief efforts for refugees, for health care, for housing, and for sensible policies in every sense of the word. His record of achievement over the years prompted Newsweek to write a few years back, "He will be remembered in both parties as one of the giants of the post-war United States Senate." And while he may be in the minority now, as Andrew Jackson said, one man with courage makes a majority. More importantly, as his career illustrates, he has fought the good fight, and it has often required a bipartisan effort. Adlai Stevenson used to say it's not whether one is a liberal or a conservative, but whether one is headed in the right direction. And Senator John McCain said about Ted, "There's one thing you can count on with Ted. He will always keep his word." There are a lot of people in Washington who waver in their commitments, but that is not him. The Patient's Bill of Rights was a tough fight. People were being cajoled by the special interests and by the White House, and he never wavered. I'm not going to go into all his accomplishments except to say that, as I said before, all of his entire life, he has fought for those things that he thought were correct. And the other side of it was equally amazing. That is, almost uniquely in this country, he is also a master of the legislative process. He's not just a man who presents ideas, but he believes that if you can't accomplish your beliefs, then you're not worth your salt as a legislator. And believe me, he is the most extraordinary legislator in putting his ideas into practice. So it is a great privilege that I introduce here at the Kennedy School of Government, the great Senator Edward Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much, Dan Glickman, for all of your wonderful service as a member of the Congress of the United States, and certainly one of our most successful secretaries of agriculture. I had my differences sometimes with Dan Glickman, the Secretary of Agriculture. He didn't understand that along with wheat and corn and soybeans, there's also cranberries and apples. And many a time I'd go up and say, "Look, Dan, while you're giving that wheat abroad and that bread out there to the starving people all over the world, what's wrong with putting a little fish concentrate on some of those too?" But he still measured up. Dan, I thank you so much for being a wonderful public servant, and I thank you so much for your willingness to head up President Kennedy's Institute of Politics here at the School of Government. I know, heard what a good job that you're doing, and I think all of us are very impressed with your leadership and the work that you're doing. I'm enormously grateful personally for that. I see some good friends here that have been wonderful mayors. Kaylee's from New Bedford, who's done a wonderful job in the restoration of that city. I thank him for being here. Mr. Albano, Mayor Albano, came all the way from Springburn. Mayor Yusevich from Salem. I thank him, and from other good friends that have joined, Kathy McLaughlin and Bill White as well. It is a great honor to be here again in this School of Government and this Institute of Politics dedicated to my brother, and in this forum soon to be dedicated to his son. No one was more devoted than John Kennedy Jr. to the IOP and its goal of encouraging young men and women to participate actively in the public life of our communities and our nation. He loved this forum and all that it represents, and I'm proud to be here to discuss the many issues that face our nation today. A few miles from here, more than 2 centuries ago, the embattled farmers of Massachusetts stood and fired the shot heard round the world, and 13 separate colonies on these young shores began the historic and unprecedented establishment of a new nation committed to the ideal that all persons are created equal. In the years since then, the American Revolution has always been a work in progress, both in fulfilling its principles here at home and supporting the cause of freedom around the globe. As Thomas Jefferson, all too aware of his own failings and his country's imperfections, reminds us, every generation needs a new revolution. We have seen this in our own times, in recent weeks, as we pass through the latest stage in the Civil Rights Revolution and put behind us, I believe forever, any acceptability for any suggestion that America would be better off as a segregated society, separate and unequal. If we are truly to be one nation in this new century, we must honestly face conditions in our country today and truly advance the cause of the opportunity for all. The last thing we need is policies that divide us at home by race and riches. The ideals of America are not realized but denied by a relentless ideology of tax giveaways for the few, and then even more tax giveaways for the few. What we need is politics that do not divide us here at home into favored and the ignored, and that do not separate us from other nations that share our ideals. Instead, on the basis of our principles, at this decisive time in history, we must renew our sense of common purpose. In this time of testing for America, the sagging economy continues to hurt millions of families, and threats to our national security remain. We must put aside policies which lavish benefits on some while ignoring what it is like to be poor and struggling, to be unemployed, to be old, phased out of a career, to be a woman, to be a worker, to be disabled, to be gay, to be an immigrant, to be a victim of discrimination. And we must weigh in the balance, not just the claims of the privileged, but the growing strains that other families now face. The cost of education and health care and housing costs soar. Few would deny that President Bush deserves immense credit for the way he united America and rallied the entire international community after the appalling attacks of September 11th. But few can also deny that in more recent months we have squandered too much of the goodwill of the world community because we continue to seem so intent on immediate and unilateral war with Iraq. Surely we can have effective relationships with other nations without adopting a chip-on-the-shoulder foreign policy, a my way or the highway policy that makes all our goals in the world more difficult to achieve. As we meet, 150,000 members of our armed forces will be in the Gulf by the end of this month, ready to go to war if the President gives the order. Over 1,400 Massachusetts reservists and members of the National Guard are among their number. I continue to be convinced that this is the wrong war at the wrong time. The threat from Iraq is not immediate, and it will distract America from the two more immediate threats to our security: the clear and present danger of terrorism and the crisis with North Korea. President Bush has said that war with Iraq is a last resort, but it's hard to believe he still means it. For weeks and months, the administration argued that United Nations weapon inspectors would not find anything. Now they have. But the discovery of empty chemical warheads is not a sign that we need to go to war. Far from it. It is an indication that inspections work. President Bush cannot expect the international community to salute America and march with us into war against Iraq when the administration has made no convincing case for war. Basically, the president is saying, trust me. Ronald Reagan had a three-word response to ultimatums like that: trust but verify. Other nations are right to ask us to verify that there is compelling evidence for war. If this were a court of law, the administration's case for war would be laughed out of the courtroom. Earlier this week, President Bush called the goal of using inspections to disarm Saddam a rerun of a bad movie. For him, this may be high noon, but for this rerun, the world wants another ending. We must recognize that weapon inspectors are doing their job and doing it well, and there's no need to pull the trigger of on war now. The American people don't want this war. Our global allies don't want this war. So why is President Bush still stampeding down the war path and not working towards a real solution to disarm Saddam? Our objective should be to convince minds, not twist arms. If we go to war with no support, even though we win it, we may well lose it, because all of the damage it will do to our relations with our nations in the region, to our image in the eyes of the world, and to the ongoing war on terrorism. I say, let the inspections work. In the meantime, America must devote more effective attention to both the nuclear crisis in North Korea and the terrorist threat lurking across the world. The United States has long been concerned by North Korea's drive to obtain nuclear weapons and by its sale of missiles to rogue nations that provide refuge or resources to terrorists. Missiles that could easily be fitted with chemical, biological, or even nuclear weapons. The sudden emergence and escalation of the crisis with North Korea is the result of a U.S. foreign policy that was AWOL on that issue for the first 21 months of the Bush administration. Then the administration lurched into an unsustainable overreaction when it initially refused even to talk unless the North Koreans backed down. Even as our ally, South Korea, sought to engage the North, the U.S. rebuffed any dialogue at all, leading to an embarrassing deterioration in our relations with South Korea. I have great respect for Governor Bill Richardson, but it is ridiculous that North Korean envoys had to travel to Santa Fe, New Mexico to find someone in America to talk to. What a contrast with the previous administration, when peace was a consistent priority in our foreign policy in the Middle East and around the world, and there was a clear understanding of the complex challenge in the Korean Peninsula. Above all, we cannot afford to lose momentum in the ongoing battle against terrorism. Plainly, we remain unacceptably vulnerable at home. Our hospitals and our clinics are not prepared for a chemical or biological attack, let alone a nuclear explosion. The public health authorities in our state already are strained to the limit as they face a 95% cut in tobacco programs, a 30% cut for AIDS, a 25% cut for substance abuse, a 15% cut in flu treatment and prevention. And more cuts are on the way, even as they try to implement a smallpox plan with very little federal help. Local law enforcement officers and firefighters across the country still lack basic technology to communicate quickly and effectively with federal authorities and local agencies. Logan Airport was among the first to check all suitcases, but we still do not inspect the vast majority of shipping containers arriving in Boston and in other seaports. Our railways and subways are not secure, and neither are our borders. We need to deal with all these and many other challenges to our readiness at a time when the federal authorities charged with such responsibilities are being significantly diverted to implement the massive reorganization needed to create the new Federal Department of Homeland Security. Our common purpose demands that we put the safety of all Americans first, and it requires a recognition that we are all in this together, and all of us must be asked what we can do. The President says the war on terrorism requires us to tighten our belts, but he refuses to ask the wealthiest taxpayers to share the burden. In fact, he proposes the opposite. In the midst of repeated calls to sacrifice, he is advocating massive new tax breaks, primarily for those with the highest incomes. He sees no need for them to share in the national sacrifice. That policy is wrong. We cannot say it is wartime for the rest of America, but still peacetime for the rich. In this closely divided Congress, the two parties are sharply divided about where to go from here. Most Republicans want more tax cuts targeted primarily on wealthy individuals and corporations. Most Democrats want more resources for education, for health care, and other key domestic priorities. Instead of seeking a victory for party, both sides should do what's right for the country. Together in Congress, we should first determine how much we can afford overall, based on the 10-year budget estimates, then allocate half to tax cuts, counting both the President's recent proposal and the portion of the tax cuts enacted in 2001 that have not yet taken effect, and half to other important priorities. This approach will demonstrate our new bipartisan common purpose for America. It'll be fiscally responsible, it'll strengthen our economy for the long run, while we fairly address the most pressing needs of our society and national security. Here at home, we must stand up and speak out for a commitment to quality education for all our citizens from birth through college as a cornerstone of America's common purpose. Today, it is America's common problem. School and college enrollments are surging, but the shortage of trained teachers is worsening. 40% of our teachers in Massachusetts will retire over the next decade. For a quarter century, the federal government has failed to live up to its pledge of full funding for Individuals with Disabilities Act. And over the past decade, the cost per student for special education in Massachusetts has risen at 4 times the rate of regular education. Now the administration is abandoning the President's unequivocal promise of full funding for the school reforms required by the No Child Left Behind Act, a pledge he made with great fanfare when he spoke at the Boston Latin School just a year ago. But when the click lights go out and the bunting comes down and the cameras leave, the money isn't there. Needed resources for education are denied, and the new tax breaks for the wealthy are proposed. It's time to make education a genuine high priority, to invest in more training for teachers, more after-school activities, smaller class sizes, not larger ones. More accountability for results means more investment is needed, not less. These are hard times for state budgets, and Massachusetts is facing harsh choices on how to balance the budget while also meeting important priorities. But when it comes to education, the choice is clear. Education is the cornerstone of a strong economy and the pathway to success and fulfillment for our children. 1 million children attend Massachusetts public schools, and our schools are leading the nation in meeting new reforms. Many leaders in state and local government are fighting hard to safeguard the Commonwealth's budget for education, and they deserve our strongest support. There is no greater priority in Massachusetts today, and principals, teachers, and parents should not carry the burden of educating our children on a tin-cup budget. While our nation's youngest children, with our nation's youngest children, we must be smarter from the start. A dollar spent on early learning may well be the most effective education dollar of all, more effective than a dollar spent at any other stage of schooling. Double-digit tuition increases and hard-pressed budget in the states are making it even harder to realize the hope of a college education. This year, UMass, Amherst, and Dartmouth raised tuition and fees by 24%. Bridgewater State, 31%. Fitchburg, 23%. Framingham, 20%. Just as Social Security is a promise to senior citizens, we should make education security a promise to every young American. If you work hard, if you finish high school, if you're admitted to college, we should guarantee that you can afford the cost of 4 years it takes to earn a degree. Surely we have reached a stage in America where we can say it now and mean it. Cost should never again be a disqualification for college. A new common purpose also requires a better approach and a genuine commitment to health care for all our people. In the past decade, we have taken major steps to provide health insurance to some of those who lack insurance, especially through the enactment of the Children's Health Insurance Program. But incremental steps, as important as they have been, are no longer enough, as skyrocketing costs increasingly undermine our health care system as a whole. It's time for bolder action. Over 500,000 people in Massachusetts are uninsured. The fundamental reform we need is to guarantee that every job in America comes with health coverage. Those who get up each morning, work 40 hours a week, year after year, should earn not only a decent wage, but the basic social decency of health care at a price that they can afford. A solid majority of businesses already provide health insurance to their employees, and the rest should fulfill that obligation too. How much coverage is enough? The answer is obvious. Employer-offered insurance should at least equal what the members of Congress provide for themselves and other federal workers under the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program. Americans not eligible for job-based coverage should be able to purchase it through the Federal Employee Program, and small businesses should be able to participate in this program as well, and the federal government should help them afford coverage for their employees. The rapid acceleration of health costs and insurance premiums also requires decisive action, but there's a right way and a wrong way to respond. Our teaching hospitals in Massachusetts are the best in the world. Arbitrary cutbacks for hard-pressed hospitals and physicians are the wrong remedy. Hospitals, physicians, nursing homes, and home health agencies require more support, not less. In addition, health providers and health insurers alike should adopt the modern information technology now available. Very large savings can be achieved if we stop running our 21st century healthcare system with antiquated administrative methods that drive up costs. Full use of new techniques can also bring us closer to a revolution of another sort. Too often, our healthcare system measures progress by the number of procedures performed, not the number of patients cured. Many steps that can improve the quality of care are often not reimbursed at all, such as home visits by nurse practitioners and training in self-care for those with chronic conditions. We should reward providers for the quality of outcomes they achieve, not just the quantity of procedures they perform. Large savings can also be obtained through preventive care and health promotion by bringing the typical standard of care closer to the best standard of care. Unfortunately, the challenge in health care is not just to move forward, but to prevent the administration from moving America backward. We must reject their insistence that stem cell research to cure afflictions like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and diabetes should be banned unless it passes an ideological litmus test. We must oppose the reactionary view that health care is a commodity to be rationed by the ability to pay. We must also reject the preposterous proposal to misuse the health crisis as an excuse to modify the tax code and bestow even greater tax breaks on the healthy and wealthy. Most of all, we must resist the coming assault on Medicare. It is clear from today's accounts that President Bush intends to complete the job that Newt Gingrich and the insurance industry failed to accomplish in 1995. He wants to turn over the Medicare program to the insurance industry and coerce senior citizens to give up their family doctors and to sign up with HMOs as a price, as a condition to get prescription drug coverage. Medicare is a solemn promise between the government and the people, not just a potential profit center for HMOs and the insurance industry. It is outrageous to force senior citizens to choose between the doctors they trust and the prescription drugs they need. The Bush administration's plan to privatize Medicare is the wrong medicine, and it must be defeated. Finally, our common purpose requires us to act on the greatest unfulfilled promise of our country, the cause of civil rights. The struggle for civil rights in the United States has been too important, the suffering too great, for this cause to be treated as just another bargaining chip in politics. The President's strong denunciation of past segregation last month does not justify the nomination of judges with unacceptable civil rights records now. A commitment to equality is just empty words when it is followed by a frontal attack on affirmative action issued on all days on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday and accompanied by inflammatory and blatant distortions equating affirmative action with quotas, which all of us oppose. An administration that takes such a course is no friend of minorities and no force for civil rights. It is the responsibility of other branches of government to right the balance and reverse the administration's retreat from equality. The Senate must refuse to confirm judicial nominees who are hostile to the core values of a diverse democratic society. The administration and Senate Republicans seem determined to wage this battle. They should not be in any doubt. We will use every means at our disposal to protect the federal courts and defeat any and all nominees who will not uphold these fundamental rights. Within a few months, the Supreme Court will decide whether to protect or dismantle affirmative action in our colleges and universities. All of us who believe in the fullness of America's promise must speak up and be heard on this far-reaching issue. Our diversity is our greatest strength. It always has been, and it always will be, a compelling governmental interest. Our institutions of higher education today are on the front lines in the battle to enable minority and low-income students to take their seats at the table of opportunity, and we must not let them down. We must also do more, especially at this difficult time, to uphold America's long and proud tradition as a nation of immigrants. It's wrong to build a wall around our country to strengthen our security. Terrorism is the problem, not immigration. We are strong enough to protect our borders and our people, and compassionate enough to welcome those who seek America's refuge and its promise. We are now at a major crossroad in our history. The 9/11 attack has forced us all to think profoundly about what is great in America. All through our shock and grief, the people's courage never failed. The attack was one of the nation's saddest hours, but the response was one of our finest hours. The ideals that we stand for are indispensable to our strength. We abandon those ideals in the name of Homeland Security. We embrace, without respect for the Constitution, with measures such as military tribunals, monitoring of attorney-client communications without court orders, detention of U.S. citizens without legal counsel or fair judicial review, wholesale invasion of privacy, or mass registrations and fingerprinting of Muslims and Arabs. That hour must not be lost. It can mark the beginning of a new era of common purpose. The unselfishness we saw in 2001 must not give way to a return to selfishness in 2003. The noble caring for one another that we celebrated then must not be succeeded now by a retreat from our ideals. Yes, our country is strong, but it can be stronger, and Massachusetts can lead the way, as we have done so often in the past. We can be stronger, not just in the power we hold, but in the promise we fulfill of a nation that truly does make better the life of the whole world. If we rededicate ourselves to that great goal, our achievements will reverberate around the globe, and America will be admired anew for what it can still be now, in this time, the last best hope of Earth. Thank you.
Can we? Yes, we're on.
We're on.
So that's great. So we have the opportunity for questions.
Good.
So let's start right here. And try to keep your questions as brief as possible. You might tell the senator your name and where you're from, what school you're in.
College. Senator Kennedy, I was wondering, the most recent IOP survey showed that 40% of college students nationwide felt unable to identify with any major political party. And more common is the sentiment that partisanship or inter-party squabbles have disenchanted the very Americans with the energy and the potential and the capacity to become political actors. I was wondering, how does the Democratic Party plan to reach out, engage, and I guess make itself relevant to my generation of Americans?
Well, I think you've asked a superb question that many of us have been thinking about at some time. We saw at the survey that was conducted at the Institute of Politics, released last several months ago, when they did the survey of college students, that the number of students that were volunteering, about 72% of students had volunteering, I think it's 65 or 6% had started doing it in high school. So it isn't the fact that the young people aren't interested. They are volunteering, and they are basically choosing that as an outlet rather than politics, because I think, and the answer is all through this room, because they get some personal satisfactions in seeing what they're able to do, and they get some satisfactions back rather than being a part of a larger kind of a structure where the immediate kinds of reactions and responses may take a longer period of time and may be disappointing. I mean, you know probably the answers to it. But I'll say it is something that I've thought about a lot, because my whole emergence in public life, I saw all young people always at the cutting edge of all the important movements. It was the young people that sat at the lunch counters and really moved this kind, marched with Dr. King. They were the young people that really spearheaded the time when Dr. King came to the nation's capital, that great speech that he made. It was the young people that really turned the country around in the war, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They were the ones, the foot soldiers up in New Hampshire and around the nation. They were the students were the ones that were turning around their parents initially, and then turned around both political parties. On the one hand, you have the Democratic Party, where the nominee was committed to taking an end to the war, and at least in the Republican Party, President Nixon said he had a plan to end it. I mean, they went about as far as you might have expected for him to have gone, but at least it was really the reaction. And the young people responded in President Kennedy's time to the Peace Corps. And he always believed that young people were filled in the time of administrative jobs on that. I've seen in the more recent times young people that have made the difference in the environment. I can remember the first Earth Day when you had Ed Muskie and Gaylord Nelson and a handful of students at the first Earth Day that they've got started. Now it's a worldwide movement. And they awaken the world, I think, to the importance of preserving the environment. So you're right, they're not there now, but the history of our time, for all of the great important moments, let alone what they have done in terms of the domestic Corps and Vista and all the rest, are all out there. The people that are volunteer from the law firms, when my brother asked for the Legal Defense Fund for implementing the legal services, this is the, I think the 40th anniversary of it this year, and asking young lawyers. They had scores of young lawyers that all volunteered at that time to make sure that those civil rights laws were going to be implemented. So the underlying part of your question is, I gather, is young people are interested, but we haven't really opened up the paths for them. And I think that's more the political party's fault and probably more candidates' fault than anything else. There is, some cynicism, and we see the fact that how government has treated its citizens in the wake of Vietnam and the wake of the loss of some of our political leadership, and the difference between reality and perception, the difference of what words mean and what the actions that are being taken by politicians has never been greater. I mean, I've seen it over a long period of time. And now I can debate the head of the AMA and say, I want a quality health care at a price that people can afford to say. He'll say the same thing, but he means it's something entirely different. And young people aren't going to put up with that for very long. I hope we can have a different leadership, a new leadership. I think we've got candidates on our side that are trying to get young people involved, who are seeking the Democratic nomination. And I hope young people will look at all of them and believe that they ought to be involved in that process. I personally am for John Kerry, but you make up your own mind.
Okay, this gentleman right here, Senator.
Hi, my name is Gerard McGeary, and I'm a junior at the college. In your speech, you talked a lot about the need to secure America against the threat of terrorism, but you also mentioned the need to protect our privacy rights. The recent expansion of the carnivore program under the Patriot Act, a recent ruling that gave the FBI more wiretapping abilities. There's a recent proposed national ID card that would contain biometric data. How do you feel the government should balance the need for domestic security on the one hand and privacy on the other?
Well, it's a good basic, that's an hour exam question. That's an hour exam. I'll try and list those little points that ought to be on both sides of the other. But it's a very good, let me add one more, Homeland Security, to your list, which is a greater threat to John Shattuck is one of our great leaders on civil liberties, which provided the organization under Poindexter that was going to have more authority to be able to get records, every record, your medical record, your credit record, every record that you could possibly have collected in this fight against. I was one of 9 that voted against that Homeland Security. For that reason, was one of the principal reasons that I opposed it, which I think is potentially more dangerous than even all the rest. I think some of the other issues, I mean, if you could take the military tribunal issue, if you have the guarantee in the administrations, I'm not going to go through all of these, but in the military tribunal, if you had a guarantee, for example, for review that they do not have, that would have made a very important difference. Their initial proposal and their last proposal was they had made some progress, but they still don't permit the guarantee, the insurance of the independent counsel, the calling of various kinds of witnesses, and also a review on this, which makes it unacceptable, that they did make some adjustments. You can go through each of those areas that you've said, and they came down on the wrong side. We have to be enormously vigilant, and there's no question that today there are serious abuses, and this is going to be something that is incredibly important for us to watch, whether we're going to be, how effective we can be on that right now with the change in the leadership and calling of hearings, and that sort of makes it more of a challenge, but we have to monitor and watch it very closely. And we're very interested in any of the ideas that any of you have on that issue. I mentioned one of the things that we were able to eliminate on this omnibus bill is the fingerprinting for Arab and Muslim, which is a program that had been set up. On the one hand, the Justice Department is to get friends within the minority communities, the Muslim communities. And they're doing that in the morning, and then they're fingerprinting in the afternoon. The Justice Department. How in the world they ever thought that that thing was going to work is beyond. But you make a good point, and it's a continuing one that we should oversee carefully.
There's a gentleman up there.
Yes, Senator Kennedy, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Brian Monroe, a Neiman Fellow. Yours has been one of the few voices of leadership in the Democratic Party on issues of national importance, but by and large, it's appeared that the Democratic Party has been almost in a coma when it comes to issues of affirmative action, of the war in Iraq, and other key important things that the country's worried about. What do you think it's going to take for the Democrats to wake up and become engaged in a leadership role on these and other issues?
Well, it's coming. I know it's too slow for many of us, but it's coming. I think you point out let me just mention on affirmative action, because we've seen on this in these last several weeks, the demise of Senator Lott, and then we saw the administration taking strong positions with regards to civil rights in this country, and then within the ink wasn't even dry on those that reported that when they sent back up Pickering, and then the abandonment on the affirmative action. The affirmative action is basically a policy that we've had 40 years. Republicans and Democrats alike have had that policy. I had always wondered why a questioner hadn't asked the President of the United States, you have affirmative action at West Point, the Naval Academy, and the Air Force. Why are you letting them continue? Answer is because the Joint Chiefs of Staff say that is the best way you get the best military and the best trained army in the world. Well, if it's good enough for the military, it's good enough for the rest of us, it seems to me in this case. But, you know, the other, and this gets in a rather mundane, if you look through that carefully, that Michigan system, they give you points if you're from upstate Michigan where there are no minorities. They give you points if you come to private schools where there are very few minorities. They give you points if you come from outside states, and many of those states don't have any. They've got more points that they give to individual students who are going to be students of color than they ever gave to the students of color, on the other hand. You know, the fact is, in Michigan, you got 15 million blacks on there. They get 8% of the university. This is 8% at the university level. So it seems, but beyond all of those, and those are really technical kind of issues, but they're sometimes useful to know some of the facts on this, is that universities are basically the avenue to opportunity in our society. That is, if you had to say one institution, it are the universities on this. I mean, it's education, but it's the universities. They are the avenue. If you say we are a diverse society, which we are by definition, universities are the avenue for that opportunity, and that ought to be there. That has to exist, or America will be a lesser country, and we will be a lesser land. It's as simple as that. But, yeah, good.
Thank you. Thanks. My name is Josh Weiner. I'm a senior at the college. And in your speech, you mentioned times when Bush has talked the talk but not necessarily backed it up with action. Certainly the emergency personnel, he's praised them but hasn't funded them. On civil rights too, and especially on your education bill, which he trumpeted but then failed to fund. And it seems like in this case, it's not just that people have different priorities, but that Bush is genuinely being dishonest in what he's saying to America. And I'm wondering why you think the outrage hasn't come yet. Why haven't these issues caught on with the public, and why are people willing to let this slide as far as they have?
Well, I'm not choosing those words to describe them. To make clear, how to Mr. Bartley out there, the old speaker, was that correct to do, Dave? The fact is that we are and I just touched on the differences that have taken place in our political institutions. When I arrived at the Senate, we used the Department of Health Education. I was on the Health and Education Committee. Everyone used the same statistics. Whatever the department said, no one really questioned it. No one went out to get other studies. I'd say the glass is half filled, so we got to fill it up higher. Someone else, we're half filled, we're doing well enough. And then we'd vote, you know? I mean, basically that was it. Now, the words that are used, and people could understand what those words, but words have lost their meaning. Words have really lost their meaning in politics, and I think that that's accentuated in terms of the political advertising. I think a lot of the political negative advertising has really followed the commercial. You know, it used to be 20 years ago, everything was positive. When you had Advil or aspirins, it was always positive. And then you saw that suddenly turn about 15 years ago. They said, you know, aspirins are good, Advils are bad, real bad. And the Aleve is really bad. And, you know, and people began to respond to that and react to it, and bang, overcame the political ads. I mean, people didn't tolerate it. I mean, I saw a personal experience with my first campaign. Eddie McCormick went after me in tooth and nail. People responded negatively. That isn't the kind of what they wanted in terms of the politics. Now they say they don't want it, but it does get a reaction on it. And that is transition into the popular dialogue by political leadership as well. We don't have the kind of accountability that we should have. And people are back home. They don't know who was for prescription drugs. If you looked at the before, it used to be, you see, with Newt Gingrich, it's pretty clear. He was against it, we were for it. I mean, you know, 10 years ago, the Republicans wanted to abolish the Department of Education and cut funding, rescind money. So you could go on out there and people could understand it. Now, everybody's for education, but you can't see the real differences. All the differences are there. And so people have to be more alert and more discerning and more involved in understanding it is really going to be the key.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Senator. My name is Peter. I'm a student at the college. Looking at the, does he speak?
No, I'm not looking around.
Looking at the same question from the Democratic side, it feels like a lot of your colleagues have adopted a posture of being, for whatever the Republicans are for, only less. The tax cut's just a smaller one, and the war just maybe not quite as quick as the Republican war. And then there are voices like your own, which are more forceful in opposition. I wonder if you see this as a split in the Democratic Party, and how you think, politically speaking, in the next few years, your party's going to sort out what it thinks the meaning of opposition is.
Well, I would certainly expect that those differences would be clearer I think they are getting clearer as time goes on. Certainly with regards to the involvement on Iraq, and I think that they would get clearer as the time goes on. It's interesting when you said not as much. I would have said that sort of about the Republicans in the 60s to the 80s. We passed civil rights, they'd be for civil rights, but not as much. We'd be for education, but they'd be not as much. So it used to be they were trying to be like us, and now they win, and some Democrats are trying to be like them. But you know, the interesting thing is, and I didn't mention in this talk, but I did last week. We had a series of Democrats that voted with President Bush, and President Bush went out there and campaigned as hard against all those Democrats that voted with him as he possibly could in order to beat them. And he went out there and campaigned against those who voted against. He didn't defeat a single United States senator that voted against his tax program. The one that was the toughest on it was Tom Harkin, had the hardest race and won by the biggest majority on it. So hopefully our colleagues will understand that it just doesn't make any sense. If they're going to go out and do everything they can to beat you, and the idea that you're sort of going along with them isn't going to make any difference. This last election ought to prove it to them. I think some have gotten the message, but it shouldn't have to be that way.
We're going to take two more questions. The gentleman up there and the gentleman up there.
Hi, my name is John Hastrup, and I'm a freshman at the college. And I don't want to take this on a negative tone, but I think people are being a little too friendly. My question is, how can the senator say that the Bush tax plan is tax cuts for the wealthy, and that the wealthy aren't sharing their burden, when his plan actually makes the tax code more progressive and takes millions of Americans off the tax rolls?
Well, because his program is $670 billion, and it's going to cost $300 billion more in carrying. As Bob Rubin said, that would measures up to 9 points in the stock market. It's probably a 3-week swing, and stock markets go up and down more. It's 4% of a GDP that amounts to $32 billion in terms of stimulus. He has $32 billion in stimulus for $1 trillion. I mean, if you got different facts, want to argue that with me, that's fine, but that's what it is. Versus Tom Daschle's program, which is $140 billion, all in 1 year. Is 1 year, temporary. 2, it's fair, it's across the board. It's every family gets $300, up to a family up to 4. Everyone gets $300. Now there it is. That's going to make a big difference for low income and moderate income people. That's going to, and that is affordable. That's 1 year. It's $140 billion, and the help and assistance that it gives to the states, local communities. I can see the mayors here. It's got some direct pass-through in terms of the mayors to help them, and it provides funds to the states. I don't really think this is we have now had, with the if this tax program goes in, that is $2.7 trillion that we've had tax breaks on it. That is for every millionaire. It's $150,000 a year for every millionaire. Now, with all respect, I don't know with those that are sort of around what the benefit is for those, but I think you'd have a hard time convincing people that this is what we need at this particular time. What we need is a stimulus program that's manageable and can make some difference, even though we are stimulating the economy by $300 billion because we got deficit spending anyway. So we get that, it's coming right off at the top. But this other can be the immediate. I mean, I think a fair tax cut. I mean, the Republicans often mention about President Kennedy's tax. That was after 8 years of Eisenhower. And the top rates were 90%, 90 and 70% at that time. And they dropped those down 40 points. And you got, boom, you got the release. And it was interesting, as Doug Dillon, the Republican Secretary of Treasury, said, they had to fight for every Republican vote in the Congress unless President Kennedy brought his budget under $100 billion. They had to cut all kinds of programs. Imagine the Republicans today. We went from $400 billion on Ronald Reagan's tax cut to $4 trillion in debt. You got it? $4 trillion. Who's paying for that? You're paying for it for higher interest, for higher student loans. You're paying for it. And this is going to put us now in another deficit for the next 10 years and put us another $2 trillion in debt. Who's going to pay for it? Your kids are going to pay for it. Someone's long-term interests are going to pay for it. I mean, this just doesn't Let me just make a final, and you hadn't asked it, but I'm going to just say it anyway, one point. Health care. You can say, well, how can you afford it? Just very quickly. We spent $400 billion last year. We're going to spend, I see John McDonough out here, correct me if I'm wrong. You're going to spend $1.6 trillion this year. We call our country 300 million people. It's 288 million. If I call it for the sake of math. That is $5,000 for every single person, every child, man, woman, child. We are spending that. Whether we like that or not, that is what we're spending. It isn't a question of spending more money. We're already spending it. Now, if you're spending that amount, 40% of that are non-administrative costs, non-clinical costs. 40% out of every dollar. 40%. That's double every other industry. If you save 5% of that, if you got someone said 5%, that's $80 billion. If you set it from 40 to 30, that's $150 billion. My God, you have every prescription drug. You can take care of every senior citizen. You can do everything that needs to be done on this part. But, oh no, we're not going to do it. What they're taking it out is further cuts on the hospitals. And the teaching hospitals take care of 40% of the poorest of the poor in this country, and they train the best people in this society. Now, where is the national leadership to try and say that these are the facts? Those happen to be the fact that we're going to try to make some common sense, bringing information technology. You have a person that has done an extraordinary job innovatively to try and sort of use that information technology and really deal with some of these issues. This country's not doing it. Our challenge is how we are going to get public officials to try to be serious about these kind of things and see if you can work them through. Listen, thank you very much, and good luck in exams. All the best.
Okay.
Thank you.